Okay, so again, I'm Taylor Grace. Thank you all so much for being here and taking some time out of your day. I am thrilled to be invited to present on these webinars. This is a passion of mine. Again, to give you a little bit of background, I have been a certified child life specialist for actually 9 years. I did the math and I was wrong. That's why math is not my strong suit. And I just graduated with my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. So I am a new licensed professional counselor associate working toward licensure right now. I have worked in many pediatric hospitals in California, Rady Children's Hospital, Stanford Children's Hospital, UCSD's Regional Burn Center. I gained so much incredible experience as a child life specialist in California working in pediatrics. In 2021, I decided to take a leap of faith where I said, you know what? I am ready for something different. I'm kind of ready to get outside of my comfort zone. I stumbled upon a job in Fort Worth, Texas, thinking to myself, not sure if I'm going to move to Texas, but we're going to check this out. Well, lo and behold, I fell in love with this job and the people that I got to meet with in this job. So here I am. I live in Fort Worth. I work on the Baylor Scott and White palliative care child life team, and I am so grateful. This job has changed my life. It has ignited a passion for working with children of adult patients. So today I am here to share a little bit about that, to give all of you as students, as future healthcare professionals, as people who are working in the healthcare system right now, just some tools for your tool belt in case you stumble upon working with children, supporting children who are going through serious illness or serious issues or challenges, or who have loved ones that are going through those things. So, I would like to talk a little bit about my objectives for today. Today, we're going to focus on how serious illness and end of life experiences impact children when the patient is an adult in their life. So, as future child life specialists, as future healthcare professionals, as those of you who are already working in the healthcare setting, we know that it's likely that we're going to stumble upon people, adults, caregivers who are unsure about how to include their children in really heavy and hard conversations. Maybe they're worried about saying the wrong thing to their children, or they're wanting to protect their children and they do so by leaving them in the dark and not letting them in on what's really happening. So today, I want to build confidence in our framework for communicating with children. So how are we going to share these things with them? How are we going to help them understand these really heavy and hard situations? I want to help you all recognize grief responses. So how does children's grief differ from adult grief? What are some of the things that we're going to look for to make sure that we're supporting them in the ways that they need to be supported? And then we're going to talk about supporting families in developmentally appropriate ways. So, meeting families where they are in their journey, making our support tailored to their specific experience, and making sure that we're setting up adults for success to support their children through these journeys.
Hey, Taylor Grace, really quick,
Yeah.
there's some static coming through. I'm not sure if it's the connection, but I think there's a few of us who are seeing that. I'm noticing in the chat. Do you want to try to, is it a microphone or?
I'm not sure. Let me check my. Looks like. Does that sound any better, or is it still pretty
It's kind of
staticky?
it's staticky right at the end, like right as you're sharing it, like it's a little, I'm not sure what it.
Hmm. Um, I'm not quite sure. Let's see. Should I log back out and then log in? Would that be helpful?
Or maybe just trying to turn your audio off and then back on. Maybe try that and see.
Okay. Um, okay. What do you guys think about that? Is that any better?
It's a little bit staticky, but I feel like it's not horrible. It's just a little bit intertwined.
Okay. Okay, well, let's see. Does anybody else have any ideas on how to check the audio? This is not my strong suit on Zoom.
I know. Let me see. Maybe not, maybe try. Yeah, okay, someone's saying try and log out and log back in.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to do
Okay.
that.
Okay, we'll see you in a minute.
Okay.
Thanks, Lori. We're taking your advice. Yeah, disconnect the computer audio. We'll see. Thank you guys for being patient. We want you to be able to not be distracted with static.
Okay. What do we think? Is the audio better?
Yes, it is. Woohoo!
Yes, we love that. Okay. Thank you, technology. We love that we can do this and meet so many people, but my goodness, sometimes it just doesn't play the way we want it to, right? Okay. Let's see. Okay. Thank you all for hanging in there with me. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce the team that I work on. So this is the Baylor Scott and White Child Life Team, and we are certified child life specialists with advanced training. We require anyone that joins our team to have at least 3 years of experience prior to joining. We want you to gain that experience in working in pediatrics, the fundamental child life skills, before you join our team, where we specialize in working with children of adult patients, helping them through challenging medical journeys and in the initial stages of grief and bereavement. Our team, what makes us unique is that we are considered the fifth essential member of the supportive and palliative care team at Baylor Scott and White. So Joint Commission looks at us and says, looks at our teams, our palliative care teams, and says, child life specialists need to be a part of the team. So we are considered that fifth essential member. We are small but mighty here at Baylor Scott and White. For those of you who are not in Texas, we are a very big state, and we have a lot of Baylor Scott and Whites around the state of Texas. So there are 6 of us on this team. We are each designated to a specific hospital throughout the Baylor Scott and White system and around the state of Texas. For those hospitals that don't have a designated child life specialist, we offer virtual support to them. So we still provide that support to patients and families that need the support for the children in their lives, but we do it through the phone and through video. So what else do we do here on this team? So we educate adults about children's concerns and their behavioral responses. So we essentially are coaching adults on what to look for, how to share this information with their kids. What are some of the things that might come up in these conversations? What can they expect? We want them to continue to be the expert in their child, so we really help guide them along the way. We provide support that is unique to the family situation. So we know every family, even if they are experiencing serious illness or having a loved one that's experiencing serious illness, not everyone's journey is going to be the same. So we want to make sure that we tailor those resources, the support to the specific situation that that family is going through. And then we directly work with children involved in the patient's life. So, with the parent's permission, with the caregiver's permission, we can facilitate a one-on-one visit with children to help them understand what's really going on with their people. We have designated spaces in our hospital system. So, we don't have playrooms like the typical pediatric specialists do, but we do have specific areas where we can meet with children. So let's talk about that word palliative care. So what does palliative care mean? So we are palliative care child life specialists, and palliative care is specialized medical care for people living with serious or long-term illness. The focus of palliative care is going to be on comfort, on easing pain, on managing symptoms, and reducing stress, so that people can feel better and live as fully as possible. So oftentimes when people are on palliative care, sometimes they're still seeking curative options for their serious illness. Sometimes they're at that point where they're hoping for more time with their children, which means that they're going to continue to seek that curative treatment. This is very different from hospice. We get confused with hospice a lot. Hospice is that end of life care, and palliative care is not the same thing. So at Baylor Scott and White, palliative care child life specialists, we help patients and families understand how they can support the children that they love during medical journeys. So it's really important to me to understand the why behind all of this. So before I go in and share some of these tools and things to think about if you find yourself in these situations working with children of adult patients, I think it's important to talk about the why. What's the why behind what we do? And when we know our why, we can be the best advocates for children and families going through really heavy and hard situations. These are some comments that we hear pretty often from the people that are at home with these kids that are going through these medical journeys. So I'd like to share them with you. I wasn't sure if I should tell my kids. I don't want them to remember their person like this. Where I didn't know how to tell my kids about this situation, or they're just too young, so they won't remember or they won't understand. So these are those comments that my team knows as those, for lack of a better word, trigger comments that say, oh, we're going to help you understand why it is so important to include kids in these conversations. So continuing with our why, an estimated 6.4 million US children will lose a parent or a sibling before the age of 18. That's a lot of kids that have to face really heavy and hard challenges before they're even a young adult. So we know that when grief is not managed, there are high rates of depression, of increased opportunity for PTSD, difficulty expressing emotions, misconceptions. So grief doesn't always have to be, end of life. It can be changes. It can be the grief that comes with a loved one that's just been diagnosed with something really significant. So these are all really big, challenging things that we don't want our kids to go through. And I know that everyone on here is passionate about working with children. So this is our why. We want to decrease these symptoms. We want to make sure that we are changing the statistics to ensure that kids are supported and they feel as if they're a part of these situations versus left in the dark. So this is important. Supporting children, including them in the conversations is important because research shows that when supported children can be emotionally healthy during and after a medical journey, they cope better. They pick up. Kids don't necessarily need to hear the words from us. If we leave them in the dark, sometimes they pick up on physical and household changes. So even those kids that we haven't told that mom is going through a cancer journey, they see that there's physical changes happening with mom. They see that the mood has changed, the vibe, teenagers love to say that word. The vibe has changed in the house. Like, what's going on? So they pick up on those things and then they start to create their own stories, and they spin stories sometimes that can be far worse than what's actually going on. When we include kids in these conversations, it increases their feelings of being loved, respected, safe, and included. We know that developmentally appropriate, accurate information, it promotes ongoing trusting relationships. So I like to tell parents that we, as child life specialists, as those helping professionals, as whatever your title is in working with these families, we're simply the guides. We want families, we want adults, we want children to be the heroes of these stories. So it's our job to ensure that we're giving these adults that information and we're promoting those ongoing trusting relationships that adults have already established with their kids. We also know that open and honest discussions, they reduce stress and misconceptions. When we don't tell kids what's going on, they create their own stories, they spin their stories. We do this as adults, I do it as an adult too. So we want to make sure that they're not spinning these stories into things that are just not necessarily true. How do we tell children about serious illness? So, as child life specialists, we know the importance of knowing how to developmentally appropriately meet the child where they are developmentally. So, one of the things that our team believes in is not just the language that we use with the kids, but the language that we use with adults. So, when we talk to adults about what their kids have been told and how we help them understand a serious illness or a medical journey, we start with an assessment with the adult. So we talk to the adult about what have the kids been told? And the word told is very important versus what do the kids know? When we ask adults, what do the kids know about the situation? A lot of times we get the response of, our kids know everything, or they know most of what's going on, which is very vague, right? We want to have an accurate idea of what have they been told. Have they heard that word cancer? Have they heard that their person is going to die? These are all really important details that we want to make sure that we gather in our assessment to ensure we're giving them the right tools to support their children. We encourage when we hear things like, we haven't told them that mom has cancer, but we've told them that she's really sick. We encourage the use of concrete language. Same thing with death and dying. We acknowledge that those words are really hard to use. They just are. They feel heavy. They feel big when it comes to talking to children. But we also know that children don't understand euphemisms like they passed away or they went to heaven and now they're an angel. We have to make sure that we're using concrete language, and we educate parents on the importance of using that concrete language to help kids understand the medical situation. We use terminology like big sick versus little sick. So, big sick, mom has a big sick, and the name of that big sick is cancer. And a big sick requires the doctor's attention, it requires big medicine, it requires mom to stay over in the hospital. And sometimes we can't always see that big sick in mom, but we know that that big sick is there and it's not going to go away on its own. And we talk to them about how this is different from a little sick, like a cough or a cold or a stomach ache. Kids can usually recall a time where they've experienced a little sick. And we talk about how they didn't need to go sleep over in the hospital typically with that little sick. And we help them understand the severity of this and the bigness of it by using this language, which is that developmentally appropriate language. And we encourage parents to use this with their kids. We talk about scripting for explaining treatment. We know as child life specialists, preparation is a key ingredient to what we do. And so we want to give them scripting for explaining treatment, for visiting the bedside. What does it look like to visit mom or dad in the ICU? We talk to kids all the time in pediatrics about what the environment is like in the ICU. We do the same thing with children who are visiting their people at the bedside. We help them come up with ways to help children understand physical changes that take place because of a serious illness. Mom's hair is going to go away, but that means that it doesn't mean that it's not going to stay like that forever. It's going to come back. We give them scripting for withdrawing life-sustaining treatment, so helping kids understand that their person's body is being kept alive by those machines. And when we release their body from those machines, that means that their body is going to stop working and they're going to die. So we really emphasize the importance of scripting. We don't just want to tell adults, the caregivers, the parents of these children, you got to tell them what's going on. We want to tell these parents how to tell them what's going on. We address the three most common concerns. So not only do kids want to know what's going on with their person in the hospital, but kids are human too. They have concerns, they have big worries. So we talk to adults about what are some of the common concerns that kids have, and we'll refer back to those in a moment. And then once we have these conversations with adults, we do offer the opportunity to meet with kids for child life visits. And our child life visits look a little different than the typical pediatric visit where we pop into the room and see what the needs are. We plan these ahead. We want to make sure that we get the adults' permission before we meet with their children. We have a plan of what are we going to talk to these kids about? What are they struggling with? Maybe they need a space. Maybe they know everything that's going on with their person, but they just need a space with somebody who's not a family member to share their emotions, to talk about the big questions that they're afraid to ask their other people about, and really just kind of get it out. We use therapeutic interventions during these child life visits. So it looks like arts and crafts, but there is a reason or a meaning behind what it is that we're doing. Maybe it's to promote connection between their person. Maybe, you can see a picture on the left-hand side here. Maybe it's medical play to gain an assessment of what that child is understanding of their person's illness. Or maybe it's an opportunity for connection where it's like, I'm going to create something that reminds me of mom that's in the hospital. And I'm going to give mom that thing that reminds her of me. And we're going to use that as a way to stay connected while she's here in the hospital and I'm at home. So let's go back to those three common concerns. So I always like to think of this in chunks. So when we help support children of adult patients, we want to help them understand the medical situation, give them the concrete information in really developmentally appropriate ways. And then we want to address that they're probably going to have some questions and concerns about what's going on with their person. So the three most common concerns, we take Kathleen McHugh's information. We love her on our team. And she's a child life specialist. And from her experience, she knows that kids have three common concerns. The first one is going to be, can I catch it? So can I catch what my person has? Am I going to catch my dad's cancer? Am I going to just as an example, I had a 6-year-old little girl in my office whose mom had cancer, and she looked at me after visiting several times. And this is her mom. She's a very, very important part of her life. She looked at me after I asked her, do you think you can catch cancer? And she said, yeah, with big eyes, big worried eyes. She said, I've hugged my mom a lot since I visited her in the hospital. So we talked about how you can't catch cancer and the difference between catching something like a cough or a cold and not catching something like cancer that's not contagious. The second common concern is, did I cause this to happen, or can I fix this? So kids will wonder, a lot of our kids that we're working with are experiencing that magical thinking. Is this something that I can control? That's what's behind that magical thinking. So we've had kids before ask us things like, I wonder if I had just been nicer to my person, could I have stopped them from having to come into the hospital? Or I wonder if maybe I had just seen that dad was coughing. Maybe I could have told him to go to the doctor quicker and this wouldn't have happened. So we want to unpack these things. We don't just want to tell families that these are the common concerns. We want to help them understand, what are some of these things that kids are experiencing? What can they spin in their head that could potentially be a big misconception that they're living with internally versus externalizing it verbally? The final concern that kids often experience is, who's going to do the things that my person did now that they're sick and in the hospital? Or who's going to do the things that my person did now that they died? Another example that I had was I had three young little boys that were in my office talking about their pawpaw who had just died. And their big concern was that pawpaw was no longer going to be there to make them oatmeal every morning. And that's a big deal to them. We acknowledged how that's an important part of their routine, something that they look forward to every day. And we talked about how just because Papa's not here anymore to do that, that doesn't mean that they don't get to do that forever. We're going to find different ways to make sure that they get to do those things. So let's transition and talk about how to help children cope with a loved one's medical journey. So again, I like to think of this in chunks. We talk to kids about what's happening. We help them address some of their concerns, their worries, their questions, and then we help them cope, because some of these things are really heavy and hard, and there's not really a way for us to make them better or to fix it, but we can help them move through this journey, and we can find ways to help them cope, which is another essential part of being a child life specialist or the coping experts. So the way that we can do this is we can encourage opportunities for connection and healthy emotional expression. So on the right, you guys will see a picture of an intervention that one of my colleagues did. This is an intervention that she used to help create connection between children and their dad that was in the ICU for an extended period of time. These kids came to her and said, we want to go visit dad, but we don't know what to do when we go into the room. Like it's awkward. It feels scary. There's so many machines. There's so many things happening. So they came up with a plan together. They decided, hey, we're gonna create a list of questions that we can ask dad when we go in the room. So that created an opportunity for connection, and that also helped the kids feel empowered as they walked into that room, ready to see their dad. They had a plan. They knew what they wanted to do. Healthy emotional expression. So with adults, we coach them on the importance of expressing their own emotions with their kids. I know everyone on here has probably heard this in some way, shape, or form, but we hear a lot of adults say to us, I'm trying to be strong and not cry in front of the kids. When crying is an essential part of having a loved one in the hospital, or the grief that you feel about the change that's happened, or the grief that you feel about death and dying. So we encourage people, our adults, caregivers, anybody who's involved in that child's life, to promote healthy emotional expression by modeling it. So model with these kids. I'm what that could look like is I'm having a day where I really miss dad. I wish he was here at the dinner table with us, and I miss him terribly. Have you guys felt like that this week? Or have you had a moment where you feel like I want to cry? Those things are modeling healthy emotional expression, and they give our kids the green light to be able to share how they're feeling too, which is ultimately how we want to help them cope with the medical journey or the serious situation. We can educate families and caregivers on the common behavioral responses that children have when a loved one is seriously ill. So we can talk to them about typical changes in behavior versus red flag behaviors, and we'll get a little more in depth with that in just a second. Again, we can discuss scripting for having challenging conversations with kids. Maybe it's not just having that initial conversation with kids, but it's helping them cope with maybe the repetition that the family is getting. So maybe they're continuing because they don't have a developmental understanding of the permanence of death. Maybe they're continuing to ask mom where their person is. So we're helping them cope with the loss of their person by giving them suggestions as to how to acknowledge those comments and how to help their child begin to understand the permanence of death. And finally, we encourage preparation for events that happen after the death has occurred. So we want a unique part of our support at Baylor Scott and White is that our support does not have to end after the loved one dies. We can continue to provide that initial stage of grief and bereavement support. So we find that there's a lot of things that kids are experiencing that kids are experiencing for the very first time, like a funeral, a memorial service, burial of the body, cremation, viewing of the body. As we all know, as adults, these things can be interesting events for us to go to. And especially think about being a child and not being prepared for what you're going to see in these events. We can help them cope with these things by, again, preparing them for what they're going to see, what they're going to experience, and what they can do to participate, and the choice that they get to participate in these things. So let's talk about behavior, because not all of our children are going to be at the developmental stage where they can they can verbalize how they're feeling. So behavior is communication. And we talk to families about how kids are showing us how they're coping, how they're doing through their behaviors. So we talk to families about the importance of paying attention to their behaviors. So some of the typical changes in behavior can be communication as to how kids are doing. And maybe their kids are communicating that something is just not right in their world, and they're doing it through their behaviors. Some of the typical changes that we see are maybe they're having a really hard time focusing in school. So when a big situation is happening in their family, we encourage families to go to the school, go to the teachers, and talk to them about what's happening at home, what just happened, especially if it's a death in the family. Tell these teachers and the school counselor what happened, because grief is long lasting. They're going to see these effects. They're going to see these changes in behavior from their kids. Some other changes in behavior can be maybe their eating habits have changed, their sleep schedule has changed. Maybe all of a sudden the little ones are really attached to the healthy caregiver. We talk to families about these things because we want parents to be prepared for what they could experience. We also want parents to know that these behaviors, they typically will resolve themselves after a period of time. We always say, seek on the side, the licensed professionals are there. We want you to use them. And if you feel like you need that support, we will be the ones to help you find that support through licensed professional counseling and therapy. And then we talk about the difference between typical changes in behavior and red flag behavior. So red flag behaviors are those concerning, risk-taking behaviors that make the parent or guardian pause for a second, that make their mama gut, their dad gut go, hold on, this is really unlike my child, or this feels like really out of character for them. Those would be like engaging in drinking alcohol or drugs, or staying out really late, getting kicked out of school. All of a sudden, a huge change has occurred in their behaviors. We encourage licensed professional counseling as soon as possible, to develop coping strategies for those red flag behaviors. We want them to seek that professional counseling, and we really advocate for that to take place, especially if the parents are classifying it as a red flag. So before we get into the next part of this presentation, for the newer students on this call today, I would love to just go through some of the developmental understanding of death and dying. So the next part of my presentation is to really focus on support for children when a loved one has died at the end of life. So in order to do that, it's really important that we understand the developmental understanding, children's developmental understanding of death and dying. So as a quick review, some of the common understandings and responses from children. So 2 and under, they sense that something has changed. They can't articulate that, but they can sense it. They do not understand death, and they likely won't remember their person, but they'll pick up on the changes that are occurring within their routine in their household and in the caregivers that are healthy. Ages 2 to 5, they may believe that death is temporary. They feel sadness, but they don't fear death itself. Their grief can be mixed with normal play. So we always talk to families about how children will grieve in waves. And that means that when you come to them with that serious conversation, with that serious piece of information, they might look back to you and say, okay, mommy, can I go and play? Or what are we going to have for dinner tonight? That can feel very off-putting for adults. So we want to prepare them for those responses and prepare them that that is a common understanding and a common response from a 2 to 5-year-old. And then also this age can form strong attachments to other people in the family, those other caregivers, those healthy caregivers. 6 to 9, they're going to begin to understand that death is permanent. They're going to fear death and that others could die too. They may fear guilt, or they may feel guilt or blame themselves. And they're going to use that magical thinking. So that means what happens around me happens because I can control it. So that goes back to those common concerns that we talked about. We want to ensure that they're not believing that they have caused this to happen. Ages 10 to 12, they're going to understand that death is permanent. They're going to ask more detailed questions, more practical questions about what's happening, how this happened. They're going to worry about who's going to care for them. And they may strongly identify with the person who died. And then 13 to 18, they're going to understand that death is inevitable. So they may worry about their own death. They can often hide their feelings from peers, or even from the adult in their life. They could internalize those feelings. That's a really common thing that we hear from adults is, my teenagers know and they've been told what's going on, but they haven't really shared anything. So I don't know how they're doing. Well, it's common for teenagers to internalize those feelings. So we coach them on ways to help them share those things. Teenagers could also question beliefs and meaning, and they may feel angry or fearful about the future. This is the group of kids that are going to acknowledge that, okay, this is long term and my person is not going to be here for these really big stages in my life, or, even in future stages when I get married, when I have children. So Let's talk about support when the journey leads to end of life. So, when the journey leads to end of life, we want to make sure that, again, I hit on this a little bit to begin with, but we want to prepare kids for the events that happen after the death. So, funeral, memorial service, burial, viewing of the body, cremation. So, we know preparation is important. I keep saying that. We're all child life specialists. So that prep for these events is just as important as the prep that we do to go into the ICU and to see what we're going to see. The same thing happens at these events after the death has occurred. You can see on the right hand side, we use this at Baylor Scott and White. We have little caskets, we have tiny urns to help kids see what these things are going to look like, and then to talk about in developmentally appropriate ways. What does that mean? Well, even in this situation, we'll talk about how maybe their person is going to look like they're sleeping, but it's important to remember that their person died, and that means that their body stopped working. A common thing that we hear from kids too is, are my people going to feel any pain in that casket? Are they going to be scared when they go there? So helping them understand those concrete things that, their person died, so their body stopped working. That means that they don't feel pain. They don't feel scared. Those are important things to acknowledge with them, even after we've had that initial conversation, to help them understand that their person died. We can discuss ways to include them in events after the death. So not only is it important to prepare them, but we want to include them. So not just say, do you want to come or do you not want to? We always want to give kids the choice of attending, of saying goodbye, of coming to the bedside. Once we do that, it's also helpful for their coping to find ways to get them involved. So some of the ways that we encourage families to involve their children in these events could be helping them or including them in picking out pictures of their person. Maybe the family is planning a slideshow or to display pictures. It helps kids feel connected when they see, okay, I chose those things and they're here on display. Maybe it's picking out flowers, music. Maybe it's giving them the choice and helping them understand that some people at these events like to go up and talk about their person and share something that feels special to them about the person that they love that died. Is that something that you might want to do? We've had kids before that we've helped, or at least, guided on writing certain things to present at a funeral service. We can support them in the initial stages of grief and bereavement. So these are obviously the initial stages. The death has occurred. They're anticipating the events that happen after the death, and then they're going back to life after the death has occurred. So that in between stage, those are the initial stages of grief and bereavement. It's important that I touch on this too, because as child life specialists, we really aren't designated for that long-term support. We want to make sure that we're providing that in the moment support, which is why we call it that initial stage of grief and bereavement. Once we feel like the family has, they've gone through that funeral service, they have kind of developed that initial coping, we encourage them to seek that licensed professional counseling and therapy for that longer term grief support if they feel like they need that. And we really try and make sure that we are communicating with families that we aren't that long-term support. We are simply that initial support in hopes that they will continue to find ways to cope with their grief, because we know that it doesn't just stop after the funeral ends. And then finally, we talk about the difference between children's grief and adult grief. So we hit on this because it's different. And let's get into that a little bit. So adult grief and children's grief. So adults, we grieve very differently from children, and we want to prepare the adults in the children's lives for what this is going to look like. So adults can understand that death is permanent. We express grief verbally through emotions like sadness, anger, or guilt. We grieve continuously and intensely for longer periods of time. And our focus is on the emotional loss and identity changes or existential meaning. So that's adult grief. And then we have children's grief. So children's understanding depends on their developmental stage, which is what we just talked about, right? So every child is going to understand this differently, and they're going to continue to develop a detailed understanding of the death of their person as they grow up. Grief is expressed, they express their grief through behaviors and play. We talk to parents who have really young kids about watching how their kids are playing, because when we watch how they play, sometimes they play out these scenarios. They'll play out the funeral service, or they'll play out the medical situation that's happening in real life. Kids will grieve in short bursts, and they move from grief to play often. That's going back to that scenario that I shared with you about how we can go to our kids and say things like, babe, we have to tell you something really heavy and hard. We just learned that dad is going to die from this illness. And they could look back and say, okay, can I go play? We want to prepare adults for that, because again, that can feel really off-putting. It can feel like, wait, do they understand what's happening? Do they not understand what's happening? So we want to help them, the adults, understand that this is a typical way that children will grieve. They'll grieve in those waves. They regrieve losses as they mature and gain a new understanding. So again, like holidays, big milestones, those are the moments where kids can regrieve and can grieve the death of their person. These are those moments where we remember that our people are not here anymore. So we talk to parents about how we want to anticipate those milestone events and talk to our kids about how are we going to include them in these big events? How do we want to include mom, who is not going to be here for your graduation? How do you want to honor our person during the holiday season? That way, they don't get to the holiday, they don't get to the milestone and feel like, oh my gosh, I wish we would have thought of this ahead of time. I wish we would have done something to just acknowledge this. And then we also talk about how loss disrupts their sense of safety and predictability. The who will take care of me is a big conversation and a big worry that kids have. And it's a worry that will continue to happen as they grow older and as they continue to develop that detailed understanding of their person that died. So I want to just touch on a couple of takeaways for all of you. One of the things that I hope you all leave with today, I hope you leave knowing, in whatever stage of your professional career that you're in, I hope you leave knowing that kids are aware and they pick up on a lot of things. They know what's going on even before we share something. Maybe they don't know every detail, they don't know the concrete aspects, but they can sense when something is going on. So they need honest, developmentally appropriate information. And we can encourage adults in their life to be able to give that to them. We can encourage people to include them in those conversations so that they don't develop their own stories about what's happening. I also hope you can take away that behavior is communication. So our kids will show us how they're coping through their behavior. We want to pay attention to things like typical changes in behavior versus red flag behaviors. What are they trying to communicate to us, and what are they sharing with us through their behavior, especially when a loved one is seriously ill or when someone that they love has died. And then finally, children grieve differently than adults. We can't expect kids to grieve the same way that we do. Just because we're adults and we're sad doesn't mean that our kids have to feel that way. When we educate adults on the difference between children's grief and adult grief, that gives our kids more of a chance to process and develop and to figure out ways to cope with their own grief. Our support should absolutely reflect that. So some of the final things that I want to share with all of you, first and foremost, thank you for being here today. Thank you for just the tuning in to something that is very, very, important to myself, to the team that I work on. I know as future child life specialists, as child life specialists, as helping professionals, everyone has a place in their heart for kids. And we want to make sure that they're being supported through these really heavy and hard things. Challenges are coming. Our world is an interesting place in this day and age. And I just want to thank all of you for being those people who are dedicated to making sure the little ones, even the little ones that are teenagers, are well supported through all of this. So one of our favorite people, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, he's a leading death expert. He says, grief is not a universal experience. Loss is the universal experience, and grief is unique. I find this to be really important to share with anyone who I speak with, because it's not a universal experience. It's a personal experience. And we can't tell people how to do it the right way. We want to just help them through it. Grief is anchored in love, it's not anchored in logic. And my encouragement to all of you is to be the guide in the midst of the heavy and the hard challenges that children, that adults, that families are facing, and know that we can't fix it, but we can absolutely offer them a place to process it and feel it. So thank you so much again for having me. I am honored to be here, and I have left some time for questions, for comments. Yeah, so please let me know.
Thank you so much, Taylor Grace. That was incredible. We have about 10 questions that I would love to read for those of you who are listening
Sure.
in. And then the overarching is people would love to have your PowerPoint as well as, oh, here, I'll take my video, your PowerPoint as well as the resources, like your references. So if you don't mind, if you send that to us, we'll post that. But the first question is, how do you have this conversation with adults who don't use the words cancer or death? What should you do if the adults have not dealt with a serious illness?
Okay, so I'm hearing maybe, yeah, advocating for those concrete words, and maybe the adult is being a little resistant to sharing those things. Um, Typically, when we have these conversations and adults push back on that word, we talk about the importance of using that word because it's likely that the kids can hear this from someone else. And I go back to the trusting relationship that that parent has built with their child, especially when it comes to death, when it comes to the word cancer. If they're resistant to sharing that, we talk about the importance of them talking to their kids about it before they hear it from someone else. Because what we don't want is for the kids to hear it from someone else and to say, why didn't mom want to tell me that? Why couldn't I know that from my person? And I will say sometimes parents are still resistant, even after we share this information with them. And we have to honor that. We have to honor that and help them understand what we know as child development experts, and also help meet them where they're at. So that means that sometimes we have to say to them, okay, and we gently advocate. One of the things that we share when we have resistant parents is, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you that I am concerned that you're not sharing this word or you're not saying the concrete word with your child. So y'all can borrow that too. That's a Cindy McDonald that I always use.
Absolutely. Next question. How would you address if the condition that the parent has is actually a type that the child could potentially get later in life?
Mm. It's a great question. So that goes back to some of the common concerns. So sometimes kids will wonder, can I catch it, or is this going to happen to me? We talk to families about how if kids are expressing that outwardly, then acknowledge it. Have a conversation with it rather than keep them in the dark, worrying by themselves about it. With teenagers, we've had families before that have had teenagers say to them, we want to go and get tested for these things, or we want to be ahead of it. So we encourage family conversations about it. So don't hide from it, but instead talk about like what the teenager is coming to you with. I think there's such thing called future tripping. So if there is a diagnosis that is likely not going to happen to that child, we want to ensure them like, this is why we're going to the doctor. This is why if something is not feeling right, you share that with mom and dad. We stay on top of these things.
Next question. These interventions are so amazing. About how many times do you meet with a child or siblings on average, trying to better understand the amount of visits or length of time these conversations typically occur over?
Okay. So we always really like when we're introduced and accepted by the family at the beginning of the medical journey. It doesn't always happen like that. So sometimes we are meeting with families once. Sometimes we're meeting with families a handful of times. Sorry, children. I know the question was about visits with children. And in rare occasions, we'll see them over a couple of months if the diagnosis is continuing. So a lot of times these would be like our oncology patients where the kids really just want to come in as the diagnosis progresses or as the treatment progresses. And the family wants them to come in and speak with us just about some of the changes that they're experiencing, some of the emotions that have happened. So While I don't have a clear, straight answer for who asked this question, we really try and make the assessment based upon the family's need. But yeah, I want to kind of go back to what I shared about that, it being the initial stages of grief and bereavement support. We really emphasize with families that we are not that higher level of support. We're not licensed professional counselors at Baylor Scott and White, but instead we're really just those guides at the beginning, and we want them to find that support, and we will help them find that support if they feel like they need it more long term.
I'll keep going along here.
Bring it.
Have you ever been asked to explain death to a child with an intellectual disability?
Mm. I have. Ooh, I can't remember if I have. I don't think I've done it with the child, but I've helped coach the parent on how to do that. And we have resources for that. And I always fall back on the parent being the expert of their child. So you know how much your child is going to understand. You know whether they need concrete information or if they're going to ask those detailed questions after. So let's prepare for that and let's meet them, because we know every intellectual disability is different. So we want to meet their unique need.
And I know much of this is transferable, but I was wondering if you have any support groups for kids whose siblings are very ill or dying, any references, which feel free to include with follow-up unless you have something that comes to mind. When do you do funeral preparation for kids in-house? If you have someone that's briefly been on palliative or hospice before death, do you offer that prep in person at all? Oh, sorry, there's a second portion. Most of the palliative care cases I receive are sudden, and I often am focusing on preparing them for a visit and saying goodbye or speaking with the adult to share the news about the death. I usually email the resources about preparing them for the funeral.
Okay. I think it depends on the facility that you work at. We do get the opportunity to invite kids back into our office after the death has occurred, so they don't have to have a loved one in the hospital for us to see them. So if the family is open to it, really, we go by what the family feels like they need. So if the family is saying, like, yes, we're going to have a funeral service, and they're very worried about this, a lot of times I'll see kids that have been before and who parents will say things like, I'm really worried because they didn't do so well at the last funeral service. So we'll have them come in and we can provide that preparation with the tools that we have. And sometimes it's a phone call with families. That's just me providing that support and ideas for preparation and including kids in the funeral services or the after death occurs events. To give them that information to go back and support their kids and prepare them.
Next one, I have never used little versus big sick when describing a diagnosis to a patient. If the patient has cancer, big sick, how do you explain the flu, little sick, when they have neutropenia? Neutropenia, yeah, neutropenia.
Can you say that one more time?
Sorry. It's also in the chat.
Yeah, let me do it. Let me read it.
Yeah, sorry. Go for it.
Like I could probably read it too, sorry.
Like basically little, like
Okay.
big sick versus little sick. Like how do you explain like little sick with when they have neutropenia? I'm assuming with they being the adult, right? Because like they basically have a big sick and they're at risk for the little sick becoming. That's what I'm assuming, Stephanie. Tell me. That's
Yeah. I would acknowledge that the big sick is what causes them to get little sicks more quickly too.
yeah.
So because they have this big sick, that is a symptom of the big sick is their body is not as strong as it typically is. So that means that they can get little sicks like we have experienced, like a cough or a cold or a stomach ache or the flu.
Okay, next question. How do you personally and professionally handle when a caregiver has ultimately decided not to share details with their child or is resistant to suggestions?
Mm. That's a hard one, and it happens often, more often than you would think. Not all the time, but we have to respect them. How I handle it is I know at the end of the day, We can advocate, and that's what we do as child life specialists. And I know I have done what I can if I can go in front of that parent and use that language, in a very kind and gentle way. I would not be doing my job if I didn't tell you right now that your choice not to tell them, your choice not to include them, it worries me because this is what could happen. So I think I use that language quite often with parents that are hesitant to including their kids and hesitant to saying the real words. And oftentimes it we don't ever know with those parents, the specific population, if they choose to take our advice or not. And we have to be okay with that. We have to respect that because yeah, we can't control it.
Awesome. And we do have several more questions, so we can stay past one and it'll be on the recording if that's okay with you, Taylor Grace.
Sure. Yeah.
Next question. What are some of your favorite therapeutic activities to use for children of adult patients?
Oh, oh my gosh. Now I'm gonna like totally blank out because we have so many of them that I love. uh, I really like I'm I would basic is probably not the best terminology, but I like using things that give kids the creativity to share their emotions and their feelings. We all know when you sit across from a child and say, "How are you doing?" They're like, "Good." They don't know what to say back. So I actually in my counseling internship that I just finished, I learned a lot about using art as like therapy. So I will often bring out like mandalas and I will have them choose colors that are representative of the big feelings that they've been experiencing since their loved one has become seriously ill. And this, I really like this intervention. I know it doesn't seem like super crazy, but I like it because we can have a conversation while they color. And that gives them something to do with their hands as they're communicating with me. I'm trying to think of some other things. Kids love connection opportunities too. Kind of going back to the picture that I shared with you guys of the questions that those kids developed for their dad. We will often invite kids to create bracelets where they get to write a special message to their person on that bracelet, and then they get to make a matching one for themselves and whatever they want to do. And they wear those bracelets and they use those bracelets with them like at school, and it reminds them of their person, and it just feels like a special thing for kids to stay connected even if they're not physically present in the hospital. um Gosh, I want to give like one more. If I think of it, I'll
I
share it
think
again.
there's
I know we
another
have more.
question that will
Okay.
point us to another intervention, but this person has two questions. One, do you have any tips or resources for someone who is thinking about starting a child life program within an adult hospice program? And part two is, do you have experience with a bereavement camp? If so, what activities have you done with that camp?
Okay. So for somebody who is looking to start their own program, my director, Cinda McDonald, is the pioneer of all of this in the DFW area. I would highly recommend you reach out to her. She is amazing and has built this from the ground up. So she will have a lot of advice and just wonderful things to share. She has a wealth of knowledge and literally why I know all of this. So I'm very grateful. Um, the second part, can you
Yeah,
remind me?
sorry. Do you have any experience working at a bereavement camp? If so, what are activities that you've done at the camp?
I have experience working at a bereavement camp. I was a volunteer at Camp Erin. As a volunteer, I was not a counselor. I was a child life specialist, but I was really there as a volunteer. Um, I I'm trying to think. I also did an internship for my counseling degree at a grief support center that specializes in working with, it does peer support groups for children that are grieving. And they also have camp. I didn't go to camp, but that they would be people that you could reach out to for specific interventions. The organization is called The Warm Place in Fort Worth, and they're wonderful at what they do. Very, very great.
Sorry, I'm just typing that out so that.
Sure.
Perfect. Next question. Does your team have criteria for families seen due to the sheer number of adults facing serious illness at Baylor? Do they have a consult to palliative med I'm medical, maybe, I don't know. Is it loved one living in the home? Sorry, hold on. Do they have a consult to, oh, like, can you consult palliative care if a loved one is living in the home? I think that's what it says.
In order to consult palliative care, they have to have touched Baylor Scott and White at some point. So either it can be an outpatient or it can be inpatient. We can still see them if they're home on palliative services, or even if they transfer to a different hospital too. Typically, if there's another children of adult patient team, we want to hand them off to them. But there are not a lot of us out there. So we do provide that support. I don't know if I
Um,
answered that one fully.
yeah, I think
Okay.
so. How do you handle teenagers asking about if they will get cancer because may understand genetic component? Because they may. No.
Um, I sorry, my chat is like all over the place. I'm just trying to read them with you, but I don't know that I can.
Oh,
Um, yeah, I think that's going to go back to reminding them of why we stay on top of some of these things. So, I think developing coping strategies with them for the worries that start to infiltrate and become really, really big. How do we help settle that when we don't know what the future predicts? And how can we help them stay on top of some of like the symptoms that they could be experiencing, reminding them that they have a community of people around them that are going to be there to help them throughout all of this. And acknowledging like I think it's okay to acknowledge that we're not worried about that happening. It's not something that they can catch. I know there's a genetic component to it, but I think encouraging conversations with their parents too.
thank you. What about a script for when parents have died or parents have died and older siblings feel necessity to take on that parent role for younger siblings?
Mm. We get this a lot. We get it a lot with even when did the question say both parents died?
Either or, but like,
Okay.
yeah, basically
Yeah.
just like a script for those specific older
Yeah.
taking on the role of younger. Yeah.
Um, Oftentimes, I mean, I recently had a 17-year-old in my office who sat down and immediately started crying because her mom has terminal cancer. Her dad is in the picture, but she feels like she needs to take on the responsibility for her younger siblings. And we talked about how it's important that she stays a teenager, that her job is not to take on the responsibility of her siblings. That's actually considered a red flag too when kids take on that adult responsibility. So the way that I handle it is to talk to the adults about what can happen if we rob our kids of their childhood, of their teenagehood, all of those things. We want to make sure that we're not creating any scenarios where our kids are resentful toward us. We want to really avoid that. And usually that's when parents start to say, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Like they're just being helpful and they're taking this on. But sometimes it's really as simple as the parent saying to them, your job is to be a kid, to go to school, to go to prom, to go to football games, to do all of those things, not to take care of your siblings. We appreciate you doing that, but let's find a way that is helpful for you and me versus you taking on all of that responsibility.
That's good. Yeah. Are your patients only inpatient or are they also seen outpatient?
Both inpatient and outpatient. Yeah.
How do you address bedside visits and disclosure conversations with kids when it comes to suicide attempts?
Mm. So that's a great question. We all went through a 3-day training to help disclose, to talk about suicidal ideation, to talk about death by suicide. So we talk to every time we speak with children, we talk to the families, and especially if we're disclosing something, we talk to the families about what have the kids been told. And then when we give them our expertise as to we need to tell them what happened, we'll talk to them about how we will share that information and be very concrete about their person, tried to end their life, to kill themselves. And we want to make sure that parents are always on board with what we say before we say it. So yeah, usually we'll walk the parent through the scripting that we plan to say or that we want them to say, and talk with them first. Gain
And
their
then someone
approval.
I see in another chat, someone saying, what's the name of the class again that you took for that? The
Oh my
3 day.
gosh.
Or can you
Um,
send it in the resources that we'll link?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. And
It's a wonderful
then,
program. I would recommend to everyone. So
yeah, it
good.
sounds
They're,
incredible.
yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have any advice you can give regarding explaining cremation or different death traditions to children?
Mm. Different death traditions. So, one of the things that I always tell students and that I was told is that you don't have to know everything. So, you can refer back to the parent, especially if it's a tradition that you're not familiar with. Um, can't really remember a specific example of the last time I was given, or I was working with a child who was going to experience something that I was not familiar with prepping for. But it's okay for you to look back at the child and say, I'm not really sure what that's going to look like, but let's bring mom in here and we can all talk about it together. And you can be, as the child life specialist, like that translator for using concrete language, using scripting that's appropriate for their developmental level. Um, with cremation, we talk about the concrete aspects too. We talk about how this is a choice that people make when they die, and it's the process of turning somebody's body into ashes. And then we put those ashes in an urn, or we put them in a special place, or we spread them around a place that that person loved, that makes us that reminds us of them.
And then we'll stay on till 2:15 and then we'll we'll cut it
Okay.
off because I think the questions are going to keep coming.
I'm
Um,
so glad everyone's interested. Thank you for your interest.
does your hospital or team have any handouts or resources that you provide to adults to help them with their children that you can share with the attendees?
Yes, let me talk to my team and just see what we can share. I would recommend, we can link this, but Kathleen McHugh is a wonderful book for everyone to read on here, especially as child life specialists, as future specialists. It just sets you up with the information to be able to support these families. I would use Dr. Alan Wolfelt too. He has wonderful resources on his website. National Association for Grieving Children. Did I get that right?
I
It's
think
either
you did.
CG or GC. They also have really great information that's printable resources. And then the Dougie Center is a great place too in Oregon that you guys can use to gain information. And I think they have some printable things too, if that's
Awesome.
what we're looking for.
Yeah. I love this question. What do you do to take care of yourself and your fight or flight in the moment of these very heavy moments in order to help your body cope with these empathetic situations on your end, dealing with the vicarious trauma and trying to limit it as much as possible?
Sure. Since becoming a counselor, I see the importance of going to therapy myself and being able to have an outlet for some of the heavy and the hard things that we see. I know even in pediatrics, there are a lot of really heavy things that come in. Kaylee and I worked in the emergency department together. Like it's tough, and I think it's really tough that you don't even get to see what the outcome of that can be sometimes. So I think it's important to find an outlet, a professional outlet to talk through some of these really heavy and hard things. Not every single one of these situations I feel like I need to talk through. But I do feel like it's helpful to have somebody just on call to reach out to. I also think acknowledging too that these are not my stories. These are sacred places that I get invited into to help, to be a guide. So I try really hard to not take these things home with me. And I know that's easier said than done because sometimes you do take things home with you. Um, Having a routine on a drive home, I have a commute, so that's helpful. I would say in the past, maybe I didn't see that as super helpful, but now in this role, I very much find that to be helpful. I also think I always try and have something to look forward to. I find that to be really important in working in grief and bereavement and serious illness, even if it's something little like what you're going to have for dinner that night. Like it's really important because this can start to get heavy and routinely heavy over a long period of time. So acknowledge like what brings you joy, what brings you happiness, and finally, I would say that no take inventory of yourself. I think I've gotten to a place over the last 8 years where I know when I've hit my limit, and everyone has a limit. It's okay. We don't all have to walk around here being feeling like we're heroes and we can do everything and all things. But know when enough is enough, and it's okay to lean in on your team and say, I've got to step away for a minute. Like the heaviness is set in.
Yeah, so good. How do you work with older teens, like around 16 or 17 years? I know you kind of mentioned one example with a 17-year-old, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah. I think with teenagers, it's important to meet them where they're at. So I'll sometimes they don't want to sit in the activity space, they want to go for a walk. I know that, and we know as development specialists, that shoulder to shoulder with teenagers works better than face to face. So oftentimes they'll talk more when they're shoulder to shoulder. We have a HIPAA approved it's called Doximity, where we can sometimes text. So we find that to be, I don't text and check in like for big emotional situations, but sometimes I'll tell teenagers like, hey, if you need to talk or you need to get on the phone, we can do that because sometimes that's their preferred way of communicating. So yeah, and sometimes I mean, I just had this the other day where I had a preteen in my office who was, quite frankly, really mad. And it seemed like mom just brought her in without sharing with her what we were going to do. And she didn't want to talk to me. And I just looked at her and said, it seems like you're not interested in talking today. And she looked right back at me and said, yeah, I don't want to talk to you. And so we stopped. And it doesn't have to be something that we force. We never want kids to be forced to talk, to grieve in a certain way, to share certain emotions. So that's a little bit about how I would work with teenagers.
Awesome. And then this will be I'm so sorry. Last question. I know there's more, but maybe you can share your email address when we send out the
Sure.
certificate information. Are your child life specialists supporting children of adult patients registered with Wonders and Worries provider?
We are
It's
not
based in
registered.
Texas. Yeah.
We're not registered with Wonders and Worries. We all, most of us on the team have a grief counseling certification. So that's not a license. So we don't call ourselves grief counselors, but we have a certification in grief support. So that's what we have.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing and also staying on to answer all these incredible questions. And
Yes.
again, I mentioned this before, but we will be sending out a link to a survey. When you complete the survey, you'll be able to get the certificate of attendance, and we will be also sending out Taylor Grace's slides and some resources that she'll provide for us. So thank you guys so much for joining, and thank you, Taylor Grace, for being such an incredible speaker and sharing your expertise in this area.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for your interest. And best of luck out there. You got this. Thanks for the important work that you do.